Okay, so this will be day 2 of the Disney Storybook Countdown Advent Calendar. And I saw the number 2, so we're going to go there. Pinocchio. Pinocchio wants to be a real boy, but when he is led astray by some less than desirable characters, his world is turned upside down. Autumn Publishing 2024. Yes, it's sold as part of a set, not for resale. So let's do this day 2 of Pinocchio. Once upon a time, in a quaint little village, a beautiful wishing star shone brightly in the evening sky. A cricket named Jimmy spotted a lighted window and went inside. Jiminy Cricket looked around in amaze. He had stumbled on a woodcarver's shop full of fantastic clocks, cute little music boxes, and a shelf after shelf of toys. The shop had belonged to a kind old man named Geppetto. Jimmy watched as Geppetto took his paintbrush and carefully painted eyebrows and a mouth onto a small wooden puppet. Figaro, his cat, and Cleo, his goldfish, watched as he worked. "I have just the name for you," Geppetto said when he was finished. "Pinocchio." He took Pinocchio on a little walk around his shop, balancing the puppet on his strings. Later, Geppetto and Figaro climbed into bed. Geppetto gazed out into the window, looking up at the sky. "It's the wishing star," he cried, and then he made a wish. As Geppetto slept, he dreamed about his wish for Pinocchio to become a real boy. Suddenly, a brilliant light filled Geppetto's room. It sparkled and grew into a beautiful blue fairy. She was there to grant Geppetto's wish. She waved her magic wand over Pinocchio, and he became alive. The fairy explained that to be a real boy, he must prove himself, and that he must let his conscience be his guide. And then, with a little coaxing from the blue fairy, Jiminy Cricket agreed to be his conscience. Then she was gone. Geppetto, hearing strange noises, jumped out of bed. He was overjoyed to see Pinocchio was moving on his own. Geppetto lifted him into the air and hugged him. The next morning, Geppetto explained how Pinocchio should go to school like all the other children. Hoping to make Geppetto proud, Pinocchio hurried off. He didn't realize 2 sneaky-looking characters called Honest John and Gideon were watching him. "A live puppet with no strings," Honest John exclaimed. "We can sell him to Stromboli the puppeteer." John tripped Pinocchio with his cane, then introduced himself and Gideon. Honest John convinced Pinocchio that school was a waste of time. "Come with us," he coaxed. "We'll make you a star." Back at Geppetto's workshop, Jiminy Cricket hurried onto his coat and hat and ran out of the door to follow Pinocchio to school. He saw Honest John, Gideon, and Pinocchio heading down the street in the wrong direction. Honest John led Pinocchio right into Stromboli's greedy hands. That night, Pinocchio made his stage debut. The crowd applauded wildly and threw gold coins at Pinocchio's feet. Pinocchio loved all the attention, and Stromboli loved all the money the little puppet had made him. Pinocchio wanted to tell Geppetto all about his new career, but Stromboli threw him in a cage and locked the door. Jimmy sneaked into Stromboli's wagon. As Jiminy was trying to free Pinocchio, the blue fairy appeared. When she asked Pinocchio why he hadn't gone to school, he lied to her. Pinocchio's nose grew each time he told a lie. Eventually, Pinocchio promised that he would never lie again. The blue fairy agreed to give him another chance and set him free before disappearing once more. Jimmy and Pinocchio ran home as fast as they could. They didn't know Geppetto had been out all night looking for Pinocchio. In the nearby tavern, Honest John and Gideon were in a meeting with dastardly coachmen who had an evil scheme to lure boys to Pleasure Island. The coachmen promised them lots of money if they helped. Soon, Honest John and Gideon were back on the streets where they had spotted Pinocchio. Honest John convinced the little puppet that he needed some rest and relaxation on Pleasure Island. They told Pinocchio all about the wonders of Pleasure Island, games, toys, candy, rides, and all of it was free. Poor Jimmy tried to catch up with them, but again, it was no use. Outside the village, Honest John turned Pinocchio over to the coachman. Pinocchio climbed aboard a stagecoach filled with boys. The coachman cracked his whip and off they went to Pleasure Island. The stagecoach raced through the countryside, pulled by several scared-looking donkeys. On Pleasure Island, they were fairground rides and lots of treats, and no grown-ups to tell them what to do. The boys could be as naughty as they liked. Pinocchio soon made friends with a boy named Lampwick. While Pinocchio was busy getting up to mischief with Lampwick, Jiminy Cricket explored the island. He came upon the coachman giving orders to his men. "Shut the doors and lock them tight." Jiminy knew he had to find Pinocchio right away. He had found Pinocchio and Lampwick playing pool. "You're coming right home with me," Jimmy cried. Lampwick laughed. Poor Pinocchio was caught between his new friend and his conscience. On his way back out, Jiminy saw the coachman and his men putting donkeys in crates. "You boys will bring me a nice price," the coachman said, smiling. Jimmy realized the donkeys were actually the boys of Pleasure Island. Jimmy hurried to warn Pinocchio, but it was too late. Lampwick had already changed into a donkey and was charging around in fear. Poor Pinocchio stared in horror as he sprouted ears, his own set of donkey ears and a tail. "We've got to get out of here," yelled Jimmy. Pinocchio and Jiminy Cricket raced across the island, climbed up a cliff and rocks, and jumped into the sea. Exhausted, they headed home, but when they arrived, Geppetto was nowhere to be found. A dove flying overhead dropped a letter for Pinocchio that said Geppetto had gone looking for Pinocchio and had been swallowed by a whale named Monstaro. Pinocchio and Jimmy headed back to the open sea. Pinocchio spotted Monstaro just as the monster was waking up. Meanwhile, deep inside Monstaro's belly, Geppetto was hoping for a miracle. "There isn't a fish left," he explained to the poor starving Figaro and Cleo. "If the monster doesn't wake up soon, I'm afraid we're done for." Suddenly, Monstaro started to swim. He was ready for lunch and opened his gigantic jaws, sucking in the entire school of fish. Pinocchio was swallowed up, too. When he reached the whale's belly, Pinocchio found himself in the arms of a very happy Geppetto. Now they had to work out the escape. Then Pinocchio had an idea. He began chomping up furniture and made a fire. Monstaro soon felt the fire in his belly. Inside, everyone quickly jumped onto a raft Geppetto had built and paddled toward the whale's throat. When Monstaro let out an enormous sneeze, he blew the raft out to sea. Monstaro was furious. He chased Pinocchio and Geppetto. When he reached the raft, he smashed it to pieces with his tail. Pinocchio, holding on to Geppetto, swam with all his might. Bravely, he managed to lead Monstaro into a collision with the rocks. Pinocchio had made sure that Geppetto got safely to shore. Geppetto came to and saw Cleo in her bowl and Figaro lying safely on the shore beside him. But when Geppetto looked around for his little son, he found him lying face down in the waist. Geppetto gently picked Pinocchio up and carried him home. Once inside, Geppetto had laid Pinocchio on his bed and knelt beside him, wishing with all his heart for Pinocchio to wake up. Suddenly, the blue fairy appeared. She waved her wand over Pinocchio, saying, "You have proven yourself brave, truthful, and unselfish. Now you will become a real boy." The lifeless wooden boy was suddenly transformed into a real live boy. Geppetto was so happy that his wish finally come true. He wound his music boxes and everyone began to dance. What a celebration they all had. And that was Pinocchio by Disney. So, while we're on a roll, I might go ahead and find day 3 and 4. That way, we'll be a little bit ahead. Thank you for tuning in, and see you on day 3.